I do want to talk about sometimes the reason why you should know traditional and modern astrology, especially if you're doing readings for people, especially if you are someone who wants to be perceived as credible. Sometimes the traditional definition makes more sense than the modern, and sometimes the modern makes more sense than the traditional in somebody's chart. That's what I'm gonna say. All right. And knowing both of them helps me understand that. Sometimes the transit, the modern explanation doesn't make sense to me. The traditional one does, and vice versa. So for me, it is about knowledge and understanding it and then knowing when to apply it. It's not about what's better, what's not. It is at its core, modern traditional, there are still some core fundamental things that have not changed. And that is why you can still call it astrology, right? But again, my theory is a little bit different. I'm explaining throughout the video why. Let's settle this. I don't think this is going to settle this once and for all, but I'm a modern astrologer. But I do think it's very important to understand some of the traditional techniques, a lot of the time releasing techniques, a lot of even if we talk about like the diurnal nocturnal chart, it comes from traditional astrology. I do think there is merit in learning it, right? My take on this, however, is that, but we live in a modern world. And so if the sixth house traditionally is associated with, for example, enslavement, and slavery does exist in certain parts of the world, unfortunately. So I also want to keep that in mind. But if we're dealing with it in this context, being in the West, and what sixth house means, that doesn't quite make sense. And so what you don't want to do is create these significations of these indicators in a chart, and then somebody's like, what do you mean the 12th house is about imprisonment? So now you have to interpret every person with 12th house placements about imprisonment, because you have to remember back in the day, even we talk about mental illness in the 12th house, and how the 12th house can be your mental health, not just mental illness but health, and the physical health is a sixth house across the way, right? Is that back in the day you would isolate people who exhibited different ways of thinking, even people who weren't mentally ill, people who just thought differently than the masses sometimes could be put away. Women would sometimes put away for hysteria, for daring to disobey their husbands. Like, we have to understand that as society evolves and changes, you have to add things. Even when we talk about, the 11th house or Uranus energy, and again, traditional astrology does not use the three planets of Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus. But Uranus really helped us understand the evolution of technology, of things that are, even we think of the internet, we think of, even the technology that we use in terms of phones and, computers and things like that is very Uranus in nature. We add that to the modern context. And again, I'm not telling you what to do. If you are prefer to do traditional astrology only, go ahead. I'm here to help you see how to, differentiate between the different ones in the houses. So the first house, for example, traditionally life and body, even traditionally called the helm of life, which makes sense. The first house, it is us. It is just you, right? It's not the houses that have other things going on. It is yourself. It is your body. It is your appearance, even temperament, so to speak. Now, in the modern context, it still could represent the body and self, but in the modern context, it also talks about your assertion, what you put out there for the world to see, what you choose to activate and show about yourself can be the first house. It can be the things that you are presenting, that you are showcasing, the things that you are conscious of showing, in that Saturn in first house, people may be conscious of showing serious and maturity. They're conscious of it. It is more directive. In the modern context, the first house can represent things that you are choosing to showcase and show others. Okay. Modern and traditional, it's very similar in that regard, right? We're talking about second house. But we are also talking about possessions and income and things that we have. This is your money, okay? These are your items. These are your things, okay? But in the modern context, we add a layer to it. You add self-worth. You add value. How you feel about yourself in terms of what you have to offer, what you have, even maybe your self-esteem around. In general, the second house isn't all that different, I don't think, in modern, and we don't really get too different until third house in terms of modern. Modern, we do come a little bit more around your feeling towards yourself. your self-worth, your sense of values, personal values about certain things that you don't let go, that you don't really change, that could be seen through the second house. Those are those core fundamental values about the way in which you may live. Not to be confused with the ninth house, which is about your belief systems, right? And philosophies and things like that. Okay. Third house. Now we get a little bit different because in traditional astrology, in modern, but we talk about siblings, neighbors. We talk more about short journeys, messages. Third house is your family, your extended family, or these short-term journeys. In the modern context, we talk a little bit more about the third house as communication, as early education, your local environment, where you go each day can be your third house. Okay. Whereas in traditional astrology, it is a little bit more literal about your sibling relationships. And I would say combine it. I always say, yes, you can see your early socialization through your third house. And who do you socialize with in early life? Your siblings, if you have them, or cousins, or you socialize with your peers, which is where we get early education in the modern context of the third house. Where did you go to school? Where's your neighborhood? Those types of things. The local environment. You can see through the third house what people do each day. Where do you go each day? Sometimes you can see that. A person with Saturn in their third house, they might be restricted. They have certain routines that they may stick to, right? They stick to a certain system. Whereas a person with Jupiter in third house might try different things, go different places in a local setting type of thing. But with the third house, you do get more of this idea of like, traditionally there was even this association with it being, a kind of the moon is in its, I believe they say the joy in the third house, messaging, religion, but definitely communication, the way in which you prefer to communicate can definitely be third house, writing, things like that. Your habits, your daily habits in terms of news and media in the modern context. Now, the fourth house is where it gets dodgy for me, okay? Because in traditional astrology, they will say father is fourth house, and or parents, just say parents. And my concern with that, in that context, one, I do think we always have to go back to any teaching, any belief, and really examine it for bias, and really examine it for any type of like bias, whether we're talking about, gender bias, sexism, or we deal with, racial bias and things like that. Even when you look at certain descriptions in certain books where they'll describe, this is what you look like based on your rising sign, it doesn't account for people of different ethnicities. In my mind, so the fourth house in traditional astrology says father, it's your homeland, it's your ancestry, right? And endings, the grave, like the ending of life. Here's the issue with that. I do believe that, well, the fourth house signifies the moon. The moon, like if we go in order, the moon energy rules over the fourth house. The fourth house can also sometimes represents my roots and my parents, but the mother, the person, gives birth. So my idea in my chart, my fourth house is literally my mother. It really, my moon is in my fourth house. If Uranus in fourth house, it signifies that. Okay. And yes, my upbringing as well as things like that. But the reason why I said it's sometimes a difficult thing is you have to examine traditional anything for bias. Because if you look at traditional texts, not just, astrology, where they try to erase the mother as being important. Now you can't, because the moon energy represents this kind of idea of, we know moon can represent nurturing, and not to say only a mother can do that, but we also know Cancer is ruled by the moon. Cancer energy, what is associated with when we break down body parts, breasts, we deal with, the nurturing, the feeding, right? Again, people have different family dynamics, but that's where I prefer the modern interpretation, where mother is the fourth house, your emotional roots. Now, your family in general is fourth house. That's how I treat it. But I do think you can see a lot of energy about your mother from there. But to say that the fourth house is your father never sat well with me, because it's kind of like when you read the books about when they kind of took the goddesses, right? Instead of worshiping goddesses, you worship a male god. Yes, you come from both of your parents, but the origin starts with you, the mother. And these get into all that because I know, people think different things. But modern, we talk about private life, where you come from. Your generational curses can be fourth house in the modern context. Your roots, your hometown, literally where you come from. But also that's in traditional as well. It's your homeland. And a lot of times in traditional, in back in the day, people didn't always travel very far away from their family. So, you can see people from a prominent family with fourth house energy, or people that are really close with their family. But in the traditional, you see more about endings, how it will end for you, how life will end, the grave, those types of things. Modern astrology does not talk about it as much. But what I do like is in the book that I have read, Benjamin Dykes, it's his book, Traditional Astrology for Today. He talks more about the mother and father in the fourth house, which I appreciate, because a lot of traditional astrology will just say your fourth house is your father. And the way who you grew up around fourth house, like what kind of energy was in your house, is very more modern context of the fourth house. Fifth house, in terms of modern and traditional, I don't think it's all that different. Like when you look at the description, the fifth house is joy, the things that bring you pleasure. It is, when you think of like dating, well, that's more, that's modern. That's modern. Sex as recreation, traditional. But then you think of like, well, how does it ties into this idea of like that origin and children, right? The outcome of the activity is the children. So children are fifth house as well. Creativity. So traditionally the fifth house is, I don't see that big of a difference with the fifth house correlation between modern and traditional. But traditional is considered the house of good fortune and joy, because it's the things that you like, it's the things that you enjoy. And Venus loves being in the fifth house in astrology, okay? Well, in traditional astrology. Now, modern take on it is, it goes a step further. It's not just about sex or recreation. The modern take is it's dating and flirting and that lighthearted energy when you like someone. We can see that energy through your fifth house and the sign there, the planets of how you may engage in those things. The fifth house is also hobbies, okay? The things that you enjoy doing. You can see people's talents through here. So fifth house, it's more, I think in traditional, the way that it's explained, it's a little bit more activities, like things you do. Modern can really break down more about you, the things you're good at, being artistic, being creative, self-expression. How expressive are you about your likes and dislikes and things that you need, which makes a lot of sense, because if the fifth house are things we like and dislike, the things we enjoy, remember, Venus represents that. So I think it's very interesting that in the traditional astrology, Venus represents the Venus that's in the joy there. If you have sixth house placements and you read it, and it's like, traditionally, it's going to tell you sickness, servitude, injury, misfortune, bad, fortune, slavery. Like literally, that is what it translates to. Okay. Employees. Okay. House of bad fortune. Things that are difficult. Modern context of the sixth house is your work. And some people like their work. It is your work. It is what you have to do every day. It is your responsibilities. Instead of it just being about sickness, it's health. Now, why might that make more sense in the modern context? Well, there weren't a lot of medical advancements back in the day, 1800s to 1900s, right? Medical advancements have been happening all along the way, of course, luckily for us. But in the modern context, you can prevent certain things that you could not prevent 200, 300, 400 years ago, because some ailments were just deadly. You would just die. And now we have medicine and vaccines and things like that. So the sixth house doesn't have to just mean sickness. Now, can it sometimes mean sickness when certain transits pass through? Absolutely. And the sixth house can represent things you're struggling with health-wise that you need to work on and improve, right? Sixth house. But in the modern context, it can be more about health habits, things that you do to improve your health, right? And your service to others. So instead of it being about servitude or, literal slavery, the sixth house is the kind of debt that you feel that you owe, the service that you provide. And some people get great joy from providing service. Some people want to help other people. So it's not just this kind of assignment. Now, the sixth house sometimes can feel like an assignment. It can feel like, I have to do this thing I don't want to do, or I have to do this thing. I talk a lot of times about the connectivity between the second house, the sixth house, and the 10th house, okay? Whereas the sixth house is where we got to do the hard work to get to the 10th house goal, the thing that we really want, okay? But also coworkers, okay? Coworkers, or the sixth house as well, people that we're colleagues with, because you can see people with really good sixth houses that have really good work relationships, or people with sixth house placements where, dealing with daily life stuff is easy for them. They're very good at getting tasks done. The seventh house, traditionally it's, contracts, law, business. It's more businessy. It's more paperwork in a way. Open enemies type of, situations in the seventh house. This is not the house of you. That doesn't matter if it's traditional or modern. It's not about you. It's about your one-to-one relationships, right? Through contract, through marriage, something that you've agreed upon. Seventh house, not the 11th house. It is something you agreed upon. The enemy part of it is any energy that is an opposition to you, opposition to what you are, which is why it's across from the first house. So it can be literal sometimes, but it doesn't always have to be this literal thing that it means your literal enemy. It is the energy that you have to combat to understand how to, deal with who you are and who you show up in interpersonal relationships. Modern context could represent more about what you seek in a partner, the type of energy that you need in order to be more balanced. One-to-one relationships, even the way in which you engage in one-to-one relationships that are non-romantic, those types of things. So it's not a huge difference, I don't think, between the traditional and modern context of the seventh house, not the way you would see with sixth house and not the way you would see with sometimes the fourth house. Now, the eighth house is another one that's debatable. In traditional astrology, it is way more about literally other people's money. It's across from the second house. So it's inheritance, death, other people's finances and how they impact you. Here's, traditionally, it's not about psychology. Traditionally, it's about taxes and debt and other things, things you have to deal with, okay? Modern context, we get deeper with this eighth house. And again, if you're modern, you'll get what I'm saying. You're modern into modern astrology. Mars and Pluto. Yes, you can definitely start to talk about now if sex for recreation or, the joyful pleasure, that's fifth house. Eighth house is intimacy. It is merging with another person. In the modern context, there's more of a psychological lens on the eighth house. It can be your traumas, the things that you bury deep, right? The things that you bury that you are afraid to unearth, which is interesting when you talk about burying, because when you do horary astrology, when you talk about places and houses, basement is eighth house. Eighth house is associated with basement. When you do aura, you're looking at a place or like a place to find something. So the eighth house in the modern context is about the taboo. It can be about the occult. It is, more psychological in how you view merging with someone else. Are you afraid of it? Do you receive it really well? Are you someone that, doesn't respond well to intimacy? Are you someone that is very given and open and likes being in union with someone else? In the eighth house modern definition does expand more for people that, can relate to that. Now, the ninth house. Now, traditionally, it was the house that was associated with God, okay? And again, as people become less religious, sometimes people may not look at the ninth house as like religion directly. But it is, the sun is in joy in the traditional astrology. The sun loves being there, apparently. But the ninth house is the house of long-term travel. It is the house of foreign lands. You might see someone with Venus there or Jupiter there and say, oh, your partner might be from a different country. Philosophy, divination is ninth house. It is journeys away from home, third house, away from the neighborhood, traditionally. And I don't think many modern astrologers stray away from that definition, but I think in the modern context, you can talk more about belief systems and choosing your own adventure is what I say sometimes about ninth house. Publishing can be the ninth house, adventure, ways in which you seeking. I talk a little bit more about seeking with the ninth house in the modern context. In the modern context, you talk a little bit more. Yeah, you can talk a little bit more about the higher education, your worldview, your philosophy on things. So where the ninth house has more like distinct, categories, traditionally religion, the law, long journeys, morals, foreign lands. Modern, it expands a little bit more into you developing and growing within that, okay? The 10th house. Okay, the 10th house in general, we know can deal with career. I don't think there's anything different for either one, but traditionally it's about reputation, honor, those type of things, legacy, energy. Like, who are you? Who does the world think you are? Or who does the world see you as through the 10th house? Ranking, boss, those types of things, okay? Now, traditional astrology, some of them will say the 10th house is your mother. The 4th house is your father. Again, I do it differently. Many astrologers do, but again, I'm open to hearing people's assumptions or views on why they do that, okay? The 10th house in the modern context has more to do with ambition. it's not just about being born into something or being bestowed, right? We talk about the 10th house sometimes in traditional. It is more about bestowing, belonging to a certain rank, maybe belonging to a family that already has a title, being given a title. Whereas in the modern context, we talk a little bit more about your vocation, what you're striving towards, what your goals are, public image, your achievement, the things that you want. Less about just the thing that you can, that you're given or that you're bestowed upon, but the things that you're actively searching for, your life goals. Whereas in the past, traditionally, sometimes people could only go so far. You could, if you were born in a certain, social class, you were born in a certain, part of the world or part of a country, or you were born of a certain group within a group of people. And they're like, you guys can stay here, but you guys have to stay here. Caste systems and things like that. Like in many, traditional or, older ways of being, you can't move up. There is no social mobility. Whereas in the modern context, we can talk more about social mobility of what do you want out of life? What do you, right? In terms, instead of, oh, you're born to this family, that's all you're going to be is just this. Okay. So in the modern context, it's a little bit more of what do you want? What are your goals? What do you want? Right. And what do you want to be? And what is your achievement? Whereas the 10th house is more so these honors, those accolades traditionally. Now, if you're hearing this and you're like, but I blend them both. Great. I do think you should in some ways blend both for some of these houses. Okay. The 11th house traditionally talks more about like benefiting, hopes and gifts, hopes and dreams. Traditionally, allies, people you benefit from in business is, Jupiter loves being 11th house, especially when we're talking about, traditional astrology, allies, people that support you, all those different things can be really helpful. Okay. And with the 11th house, traditional leaning, right? It's about they call it good spirit. Modern, we talk about activism. Modern context of 11th house, we talk more about social circles, community. What do you belong to? Okay. So again, I think the modern context of astrology is a little bit more of choice, a little bit more of you got to do some of this. It's not just fated. Okay. And it's, but again, in the modern world, in terms of the ways in which things have changed, shifted, you do have more opportunity in some parts of the world. Some parts of the world, people do not have the same opportunities. And you can argue people don't have the same opportunities even in places that claim to be progressive. So that's right. That's a thing, right? But with the 11th house, you can see more about belonging. What do I want to belong to? As opposed to traditional is more so the people that support you in your endeavors. It is around allies, people that already come and support you, your hopes and wishes, what you want for the world or the greater community. Whereas modern can be more about the humanitarian efforts, especially as there is more of a need in certain ways, activism, different movements, how progressive a person is, who their social circle is that they choose can sometimes be more context of this modern approach. Now, 12th house, we're going to disagree here. I talk about the 12th house a lot. Some people are going to disagree, because I've seen people be scared. They get into astrology like, well, someone told me the 12th house is horrible and life is just going to suck for you and you just suffer because it's the house of bad spirit. That's traditionally, it tells you it's confinement and bad spirit. Now, my gripe always with that is, yes, the 12th house can be difficult, but it's not impossible to navigate. It can be a beautiful thing if you understand it. The issue is, what are you supposed to do with that? If you tell someone new to astrology, the 12th house is a bad house and it's bad fortune, and you got 4 planets there, you got 3 planets there, you got a north node there, and you're telling someone. Now, what it is that there is a level of sacrifice needed for the 12th house. It is devoid of the ego in a way. But traditionally, it is about the house of hidden enemies, something that is unseen that can impact you or cause you great, misfortune, sorrows, confinement, hospitals, prisons, people having to be away from society, self-undoing, sabotaging yourself is definitely a 12th house traditional leaning understanding. And I do think you have to understand that, because if you understand the traditional meaning of the 12th house, you can sometimes realize, oh, I don't want to be that confined, right? Right. Betrayal, those types of things. It's things that you don't see. It's the hidden. But in the modern context, we don't want to be powerless. I don't believe anyone should be powerless. I don't believe you should use it in that regard. And again, I'm someone with 12th house placements, and I can tell you, I evolved spiritually through using my 12th house placements. It wasn't me looking at a description and saying, oh no, doom and gloom, 12th house suffering. You do have to work a lot on understanding your own mindset. You do have to make sure you aren't sabotaging yourself. You do have to realize that sometimes you can be too much in self-isolation and self-doubt. Some people can be too much into the self-pity piece with that. But when you tap into it, in the modern context, the 12th house is the gateway to spirituality. It is that shadow work. It is that understanding your patterns, the unconscious things that you're doing. The 12th house can represent, where you are, yes, karma in a way, but also like how you deal with isolation. What do you do in isolation? When you're by yourself, you're not wallowing in pity. What are you doing to connect to your higher self, to get away from the world and the distractions? If you can understand your 12th house energy, and if you can use it for good and positive, you can master it in a way where it's not a hindrance, and it's something that actually helps build and develop you as a spiritual being here in this world. But I do think there is a certain sacrifice piece of the 12th house. Not that you have to be a martyr, but it is about getting rid of that ego, shedding the ego. Before you can sometimes be successful or be as great as you want to be, you have to understand your purpose here and why you are here. And that's why sometimes you are put off to the side. But traditionally, remember what people did. You discarded people who were different. You discarded people who had different ideas and theories that you couldn't see, because you can't see the 12th house. So traditionally, oh, that person's crazy. Oh, we don't know what that person means. Oh, we don't know, right? And you would put them away. They're being confinement, isolation. We don't understand what you're trying to tell us, so we're going to shun you. 12th house. In modern context, we deal with mental health very differently, right? Or we should be. So I want us to understand that, again, I think traditional astrology is a great place for every astrologer to gravitate to and understand, because sometimes the modern explanation for something doesn't make sense.